Hello, everyone. It is Monday, April 10th, 2017, and this is the Monday Morning Analyst here on MMAfighting.com. My name is Luke Thomas. I'm the host of this podcast, as well as many other things that you may or may not have heard of, but neither here nor there. 3 parts to the podcast. As always, we take a look at the weekend's action generally, and then we look at some stuff in particular with some visual aids, and then take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. Now, normally this is a podcast about technique. That won't change. But because of what happened in the co-main event, we're going to spend some time talking about some regulatory issues there. But neither here nor there for the moment. The biggest event over the weekend, UFC 210. This took place at the Key Bank Center in Buffalo, New York, for an attendance of 17,110 for a total gate of 2 million, which apparently was a sporting record for that venue. Okay, let's go through this. We're going to look at the co-main event in the second segment. Let me say up front, in the main event, Daniel Cormier defeating Anthony Johnson at 3:37 of the second round via rear naked choke. I would have a very different measure of analysis for this if Anthony Johnson had not retired following the contest. When I was watching in real time, I was like, why is he wrestling? If you go back and you listen to the corner audio from Henry Hooft, he's even saying the exact same thing. What are you doing? And he comes back to the corner between the first and second round saying, why are you wrestling? It was a bizarre game plan. And then when that choke got laid on him, and it was the choke was deep, but the hooking mechanism was shallow, very Kimbo versus Shamrock-esque, where you can just, if it's on top of the head, you can peel it. You contrast that with what Oliveira had on Will Brooks, which was behind the head. And I was like, why didn't he hand fight at all? I'm not saying Cormier couldn't have adjusted through the hand fighting, but he didn't have to. And in the end, Anthony Johnson adjusts. So it's really hard to say exactly what we saw there. I think Rumble's only losses at light heavyweight were to DC, so something to be said for that. I did think that DC, and he acknowledged as much, that the weight cut was tough because he didn't manage his weight in between camps better. He did look a little heavier to me, a little bit softer in the middle. And so I don't know if that was age or that was, as a function of nutrition, improper, preparation for this fight. I guess we'll have to see how he looks in his next one, whether it's against Manoa or Jones or whatever the case is. But, he didn't look awesome, but he didn't need to, because Johnson, if you're retiring, it just looked like he wanted to fight, but clearly the fire's gone, which is okay. I don't judge him for it at all. But it's obviously going to affect what kind of effort and tenacity you offer in a contest like that. So to me, it's like, I'm not going to say the fans got duped, but it wasn't a guy's full-throated effort. I think we can say that pretty clearly. I do want to say one thing that Daniel Cormier has been so good at is he goes for those head-outside singles, and guys push on the back of the head and then re-square their hips. And so, as a consequence, they give him an easy setup for an outside trip. It's an inside trip. And he's been really good at the inside trip. He can get it from like a double underhooks or over-under clinch, and then he sneaks around the inside trip as a consequence, and that's an even better setup. Because they're just they're squaring up their hips on the post leg, and he's kicking it out. It's really, really nice stuff from Daniel Cormier there. Gegard Mousasi defeating Chris Weidman at 3:13 of the second round via TKO knees. We'll talk about that in the second segment. Cynthia Calvillo defeating Pearl Gonzalez at 3:45 of the third round. This was the night of back takes. 3 fighters I want to highlight on that. Calvillo is one. Myles Jury is another. And then, of course, Charles Oliveira. I'll talk about those two as we go down the thing here. But Cynthia Calvillo, I mentioned it on Fight Night. I'll say it again. I'm not saying she's a Mundial-level grappling champion. That's not what I'm saying at all. She has still more time to grow to get better, and she needs more mat time. But for the amount that she's been trained, you can tell she's a naturally gifted grappler. Doesn't mean she doesn't train hard. Again, doesn't make her an ultimate expert. But some sports come naturally to people. You can tell grappling comes natural to her. Very much so. Frankly, the fight game generally comes naturally to her, but definitely the grappling. Her back takes are smooth and controlling and efficient and smart, and they are, I won't say suffocating, but they are tight. She is talented in that regard. I do think that she needs to work on her fight management a little bit. She kind of gassed out there in the third, you can imagine, in a 5-round fight or against an opponent who has equally good gas tank who can step on it in the third. That can become a problem for her. But I think that, look, she gets her head off the center line when she strikes. She listens to her coaches. She was nullifying the offense of Pearl Gonzalez with her constant volume of attack. And so by the time she faded in the third, she's going to have more grappling energy probably than striking energy. And she's certainly going to have more grappling discipline than she's going to have striking discipline. So then taking that fight to the third and doing it in the way that she did, hand fighting superbly underneath, and then closing the show, pulling Gonzalez off of her base backwards. Vicious stuff from Cynthia Calvillo. 2 fights in, 30 some odd days and 2 submissions on UFC. I think, no, one was on a main card, one was not, I don't believe. I can't remember what her last one was. But in any case, 2 pay-per-views, big doings for her. Thiago Alves defeating Patrick Cote, 30-27 across the board. Cote retiring as well. For more thoughts on Cote and his career, please check out my post-fight show on YouTube, on my own YouTube channel that I did. I'll link that up in the description box, or the card here. But Thiago Alves, man, he really has come of age. He really has come of age. You know, we used to be intimidated by him in certain ways, because he was this vicious Muay Thai striker, and he had these vicious leg kicks, and he was really big at 170 for a time, that we rated him higher back then as a talent, and he was ranked a little higher at the time anyway. You know, the game's gotten better generally. Fighters have gotten better generally, but they were noting on the broadcast, man, Thiago Alves made his debut 13 years ago or something. Look how much he's aged, but look how much he's gotten better. Like, whatever he was back in his 20s as a aggressive Muay Thai striker, who had skills everywhere but was really good there, look at how good he is now. He can fight coming forward. He doesn't take a lot of abuse. He did in the Carlos Condit fight, which kind of got out of hand, but in this one he was very disciplined. He's good about attacking at different ranges. He can go forward. He can go backward. He can counter-strike. He can lead. Defensively disciplined. Great footwork. Composure under fire. This is a much better version of Thiago Alves than we've ever seen. He is a little bit battle-tested and maybe even battle-worn. I mean, how could he get out of those years of MMA unscathed? But I just mean, we always talk about weight cuts as like, oh, now this person's at a healthier weight. Look how much better they'll be. And I don't dispute that at all, but I don't think all of these situations are merely a function of making a healthier choice about weight. A lot of times these guys spend a lot of time moonlighting in a weight class that's tough for them to get to. By the time they've come back, they've also matured as fighters. And, Alves has gone back and forth a little bit more regularly, but I just mean to say, it was very apparent to me in this contest about what a mature fighter he's become in all facets of the game. Really locked down striking. Not saying he's the best striker in the world, but you can tell this is a seasoned, polished, experienced guy. He's going to be hard to beat. Charles Oliveira defeating Will Brooks at 2:30 of the first round via rear naked choke. I went back and I watched this fight just before this podcast. Just wanted to make sure I saw it correctly. Man, you want to talk about, we said it, it was the night of back takes. Calvillo, Jury, and Oliveira, and they all did it different ways. It was really interesting. If you go back and you watch the back take, which really set everything up from Oliveira, what he does is, and this is what I think surprised Will Brooks a little bit, as soon as they clinch, remember that inside trip I mentioned DC hit? When you do an inside trip, your hips are almost they're not exactly cocked out, but what happens is you scoop a leg and then you center your hips around as you drop. That's how it works. You hook the leg and you drop as you scoop out that leg. And as soon as he gets double underhooks, he's going for it. Go back and watch. The second he gets his grip up, he goes right for it. I think that kind of intensity of attack caught Will Brooks by surprise. And then what happens is Brooks gets to his feet, and Oliveira, with just enough space, because he almost lost it, picks him up and drops him again. And you could tell he had it rehearsed. What happens? Brooks, you have a choice. If you're on your back, you have a choice. Yes, you're going to sit up, of course, but you're going to go this way or you're going to go that way. Every grappler knows it. If you turn into him, they have one response. If you turn away, they have another one. Ready in their mind, and they've drilled it a gazillion times. Normally, if someone is turning away from you, you do what's called a chair sit first, where you kind of sit like halfway Indian style, right up against the back of their shoulder/head. And when they roll over, you dig the inside hook closest to you first. So if they roll over and they show you their right side, you dig your right hook first. Oliveira doesn't do that. You'll watch. He grips up, drops him. As soon as he knows that Brooks is going to turn away, he changes his grip to an over-under grip. And just so you guys know, an over-under grip works this way. Whatever hand is coming around the throat, that goes on bottom. Other hand goes on top. That's how that goes, okay? Imagine like you're stabbing someone in the heart, and then you put your hand behind the knife to finish it. The one that goes over the throat, this way, this way. Yep, that's how it goes, yes? He goes for that over-under grip, and then rather than sinking the inside hook first, he throws it over the top of the other side of what Brooks' moving hip. And that's not how you're normally taught, but I think that that's an MMA adaptation that Oliveira has made. He puts that one on there first because he knows that these wrestlers are super scrambly. It might be hard to get that inside hook first. And if I can hook that outside one where they're mostly preoccupied about getting to their feet, it will not only be easier to get in, but you can then follow them, right? There are going to be situations where if someone's just getting to an elbow, you can sink that rear that inside hook first. But if someone's on their hands and their feet almost, and they're super scrambly, put the far hook in first, and then as they get up, ride them up to the top. Let them help move you to the top, which is what he did. And then once he had it, the hand fighting, we didn't really get a good look at it, but just to point out, that thing was over here. It was behind the head of Brooks, and he slowly got torqued a little bit, and you can see his face grimace more and more until the point where he couldn't take it anymore. Boy, I just feel like everyone's like, well, what's to say about the career of Will Brooks? I'm still very high on him, but I think what did happen was he was just a little too complacent early. He needed to be on high alert, and he wasn't on high alert. And as a consequence, he paid for it. Moving to the prelim card, Myles Jury defeating Mike Della Torre, 3:30 of the first round. Another back take, but this one was different. Had him on top, wanted to spin to the back as he gets there. He actually sinks the inside hook first, and then uses that to whip Della Torre around to take him off of his base, and then puts the other outside hook on second. That's the more common way that people are taught. That's the traditional way of doing things. And I'm not here to say one's wrong or one's right. I mean, Charles Oliveira is a beast on the ground, but so is Myles Jury. Just sort of pointing out a lot of different back takes you're seeing in mixed martial arts between Calvillo and Oliveira and Jury. All of them work in the right situations with the right kind of operator. And this one, to me, was, man, you just saw a superior grappler just destroy a guy who he was just had a big advantage over. It was almost a mismatch in the end. And what I really liked about it was, in the Calvillo case and in the Oliveira case, it was efficient hand fighting that got, at least in the case of Oliveira, quick results. What I liked about what Jury did was he had super tight-ass control with that body triangle. He even relaxed it a little bit to let Della Torre spin into it a little bit, but was pounding on him a lot, really just beating him up, even posting his left and banging on him with his right at times. Really hard stuff. Those elbows coming over the top were vicious. Della Torre really had nowhere to go. And you guys have to understand this. If you ever trained jiu-jitsu, you know, to my mind, we still have not come up with great mount escapes in MMA. Like, guys get out of it in certain ways, and certainly in the lighter weight classes, but it's taught in jiu-jitsu where you might get an elbow across the hip and then one on the knee, and then you shrimp and you capture half guard, or you can shrimp and you can capture full guard. There's obviously, bridges you can hit and stuff like that too, but in MMA, when someone's pounding on you, you can't do an elbow escape unless you do it quickly. It's hard, man. All the real good and effective mount escapes, reversals notwithstanding, they involve using your hands in ways that don't protect your face. So it's a real big problem. Kamaru Usman defeating Sean Strickland 30-27 and then 2 30-26s. Kamaru Usman is a freak of an athlete. My goodness. Strong, totally strong-minded. Just, guys, once they lock up with him, they realize pretty quickly that they cannot match him physically. I think he makes mostly pretty good decisions. I would like to see his striking game polished a little bit. There's a little bit of a, not repetition exactly, but it's a more limited game. Whereas with his wrestling, it's so comfortable he can do so many more things. He's involving passing, heavy ground and pound, dominant forms of control. If we can up his striking game, and he's a little bit of a brawler by choice, not because he can't be. If we can get him to make a little bit better decisions, and we can, hopefully his coaches can make him do some things that are a little bit more technically sophisticated, man, that guy's going to be a handful for everybody. Shane Burgos defeating Charles Rosa at 159 of the third round. There was a question about the stoppage in this one. For me, Shane Burgos is a very talented guy, but I don't like the for a counter striker, he eats way too many punches for me. But he obviously, he really has good. He is a very good counter striker, and he closed the show in the end. There were some questions about the stoppage in this one. To me, it was on the edge. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Maybe I even do kind of love it a little bit. where it was something of a mercy stoppage. Like, it's a big lesson here for fighters. If you are hurt and you want, look, here's what I would say. If you want a fight to continue, you need to give a referee every indication of that. I don't know what happened with Chris Weidman in the co-main event, but if he was milking it, I know some people said it was karma. We'll talk about this later. But whatever the case was, the doctor saw enough to close the show. So that's a problem. And in this one, what you see is a lot of guys, they'll get hit. Sometimes they stick their tongue out, or they just put their hands down and they just keep eating it because they're like, oh, I'm going to show you my chin. Don't do that. Don't do that. Put your hands up, evade, do the responsible thing. Because Rosa, after the fact, was like, no, I'm all here, I'm all here. But you were taking shots, my man. You were taking shots in a way where I can understand a referee would want to step in. So if you weren't as hurt as you looked, don't make us think that. It's a pretty simple rule. Patrick Cummins defeating Jan Blachowicz, 29-28 across the board. I said this on Saturday night. I'll say it again. You learn nothing about Patrick Cummins insofar as has he really developed any new skills. No, probably not. I like Alan Jouban. I think he's got a little bit of a problem with anticipatory decision-making. He leaves his head off the center line and leaves it on so many different occasions, whether it's clinch breaks or whether it's linear attacks, and guys make him pay for it. But what a dog Patrick Cummins is, man. You just don't know a lot of guys who could take punishment like that and turn a fight around. And I'll say this, it's not merely that he was getting physically punished in that fight. You're talking about all the years he's been physically punished, and he's not made a lot of money in fighting. This is not a guy who's had an easy life. He's had a really rough one. I know a lot of martial artists who have just lived with a state of functional poverty for a really long time, and it affects them, man. It burns them out. It breaks their will. It really does. It really, really does. It affects them competitively. I have seen it. I know many guys like this personally. Patrick Cummins is a dog. Patrick Cummins is a super mentally tough guy. Not the best light heavyweight in the world. Not going to say he is. But I always had respect for Patrick Cummins, but I had a ton of respect on Saturday night after showing the kind of grit that he did. Gregor Gillespie defeating Andrew Holbrook at 21 seconds of the first round. Holy jeebus. Look out for this kid at lightweight. Whoa. Man. Great striking right off the bat. Double tap, one to the body. Almost opened his palm when he did it just to get him to react. Boom. Came over the top and closed the show. Keep your eye on Gregor Gillespie. Des Green defeating Josh Emmett. 28-29, 29-28, 30-27. I thought it was a little bit clearer for Des Green. Des Green just really managed the distance here really well. Some folks were calling Josh Emmett the white Tyron Woodley with the way he would shift with his feet, changing stances, sort of like in this immediate blitz. I could see a little bit of that too. I had made a point on my post-fight show that he kind of has a pre-Dwayne Ludwig Team Alpha Male style where these guys they didn't really work behind a jab. Now, Emmett did for a little bit, but Emmett just had a real big problem closing the distance, so he would leap in with the big right and just had a problem connecting a lot as a consequence. Caitlin Chukagian defeating Irene Aldana, split decision. I had it for Aldana. I thought she landed the more damaging shots, but I know folks were like, that was a great fight. I didn't really think so. I didn't think it was a bad fight by any stretch, but I wouldn't be like, 2 thumbs up. I loved it. Because it was one of these fights where these two ladies have a very... I mean, it's a little unfair to call them point fighters. It's not true exactly. But against someone who is as capable of offense and defense as they are, it is. Or at least it just becomes that way, or at least it looks that way, even if it's not. So it was a well-matched fight in terms of parity. They were very evenly matched. But it never really got them to change anything they were already good at. Like, whatever you want to say about the Carmouche-Chukagian fight, if it was judged properly, at least Chukagian was forced out of her comfort zone. You didn't really get a whole lot of that here. And then Magomed Babulatov defeating Janelle Lausa, 29-26, 29-26, 29-26. Casey, the videographer for MMA Fighting, wondered a lot. I think it's true. This might be the first 29-26 unanimous decision in UFC history. Not a lot to say about this one. Babulatov looks good at flyweight. Can do a lot. They noted, of course, has incredible spinning attacks, both directions, right? But I need to see more from him before I have a whole lot to say. All right, speaking of a whole lot to say, I have a whole lot to say about, and I'm sure you do as well, this Weidman-Mousasi debacle. Here's what we're going to do in the second segment. We're going to look at the slides and get a timeline of events, who said what to whom, what it all means, and then we're going to break it all down and see what the right course of action could or should have been and what it all means. Let's do that now. Let's do 2 things to get through this Weidman-Mousasi fiasco. Number 1, we're going to look at the slides. Now, there were moments in this fight long before this where both guys were doing a lot really well. I thought Chris in the grappling department was doing great. Those head outside singles, as Dominic Cruz noting, prevents the whizzer, getting sort of hipping into it, turning a guy over, potentially reversing him. Chris Weidman was getting those at will. The way Mousasi was able to get that first punch that really kind of hurt Chris and follow up with him, it was a front kick, and as that front kick landed, he followed it with a straight left that looked like a jab. Joe Rogan had called it a jab, but it was a push kick, follow with a left, follow with a right, and then he just sort of bombed on him from there. Later on in this fight, Chris Weidman was trying to pass from the butterfly guard of Mousasi. He did it really well. He turned him to a hip. He stepped past the bottom leg, so now Mousasi's only top leg is preventing Chris. And what does Mousasi do? He extends him. Chris rides it out, pushes it down, pushes past it, and then slides right into mount. Really, really nice stuff. Said it a million times. These guys with lanky builds who extend, if you don't extend and really keep them at the end of that extension, you're going to get your stuff past. So that's what happened there. Mousasi doing a good job in reversing. Chris doing a good job in holding the hand that was holding the leg that enabled the reversing. There was a lot of good moments in this fight, but this was so bad and such a unbelievable cluster F that we have to go through it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to offer too much commentary in real time as we go through these slides, but then we're going to go back and talk about what we saw. So here we are at 154 of the second round based on these UFC graphics, and let's watch what happens. Mousasi throws a jab. I couldn't tell if it glancingly landed or if Weidman ducked out of the way. I don't really know. But in any case, he just sort of reaches for a lazy single. I mean, look at the arch in the back. He was not going to get this takedown. There's no way. All right? Mousasi steps back, hooks behind the armpit, chest pressure on the back of the head. And what's he going to do? He's going to throw one strike. You can clearly tell one hand is up in the air. He's going to reset position. Dan Miragliotta is watching because he couldn't quite tell what was happening. And again, look at this posture from Weidman. He's getting controlled here. Boom, there goes the other one. Now, one note about this. There are a gajillion videos out there. Everyone's got their own back and to the left Zapruder film. It looks to me, based on the available evidence, that they were legal strikes. I gather that there are some folks out there who see the video a little bit differently. I don't think there's a ton of evidence to support their claims, but it just should be noted that they do exist. There's also some question about to what extent Weidman was in compliance with the rule, even if two hands were down, because shouldn't it be fists or palms, not merely fingertips? That is a question for the Athletic Commission, and we're trying to get an answer to that. But as it stands, let's just assume for the sake of this video that fingertips does constitute the kind of touching and physical contact that the commission would need in order to rule in that fighter's favor. Now, okay, so here he lands the second strike, and what happens? Here comes Big Dan in what looks like a very weird version of the human centipede. Nevertheless, he is stopping the action. He separates them. Chris Weidman now has two palms on the floor, but of course he's being lean. You know, that's natural. Like he was getting leaned into. If someone stops doing it, you got to recover your own balance. But okay. So watch what happens. He takes a knee. Dan Miragliotta is talking to him. Now, he separates the two. Here you see Chris covering his face, Dan Miragliotta taking control of the situation, telling Gegard Mousasi to go to the neutral corner. Now what happens? You see them showing a replay. I just wanted you to pay attention to what Dan Miragliotta is doing and what Chris Weidman is doing. He is now sitting on his rear end, covering his face. Okay? For whatever that's worth. Here we go. Now they have the ringside physician coming in. Hard to tell what the ringside physician was looking at. Hard to know what he noticed. Hard to know, if not impossible to know, what he heard. But I noticed he was paying attention to the side of Weidman's head. He was, you'll see in just a second, flashing his hands in front of him to see if maybe a flashlight as well, to see if maybe there was some dilation of the pupils. He's just trying to get some medical information, some physical cues to make a decision here. Just want to pay attention to that. This is where things go bad for him. Now you have Miragliotta coming over and telling Mousasi he was not going to take a point, but you got to be a little bit more careful. The doctor still attending to Chris Weidman, who is still sitting on his rear end. Here they have now his hands off of his face, but the doctor is still talking to him. I don't know what he heard. I don't know what was said, but just keep that in mind. Now, here is the doctor talking to Big Dan and exchanging information. It is not at this point where he tells them that the fight is off, but they are clearly concerned. So what does he do? Big Dan now talks to him. Now Big Dan goes and talks to Big John. It is at this point where I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe it is Big John who saw the replay and indicates to Dan that those were legal knees. Just keep that in mind. Again, I don't want to say with 100% certainty, oh, I know for a fact it was Big John, but it appeared to be that way from the broadcast, where you don't have access to instant replay. Okay? Hold on just a second here. Here he comes. Now the doctor is doing a physical test at this time with Chris Weidman, getting him to come towards him. This is a common one. You see if a guy gets knocked down in boxing, a lot of times what the referee will do is he'll pull down on that boxer's hands to see if the hands come back up, to see what kind of tension there is, and he'll often say, walk towards me. This is a little bit of that, and he's trying to get him to put his feet together, almost like a sobriety test. I don't know to what extent he failed it or not. You can see him doing it here. All right. Big Dan comes over, and this is okay. Now I guess I skipped the part where Big Dan went and told Chris those are legal knees, or maybe this slide is out of order. But just look at this. Here is the doctor waving in another doctor. See his hand motion here? He's looking to another female doctor who he's waving in, I guess to get better clarification of what he was doing or a second opinion. I'm not sure. Here she is. This is now another doctor. She's, of course, got the gloves on as well. Not that that makes you a doctor, of course, but I'm just saying. She also has the worst tailored suit I've seen in the history of modern humanity. Neither here nor there. These are just the chain of events as they unfold, yes? Okay, now, I apologize for this being up here, but now you see these two doctors talking to Big Dan. And what are they telling him? They're telling him they have to stop the fight. This is at the point at which they do that. And now you can see Chris Weidman, he's been on his feet for a while, but now you can see he's physically beginning to gather himself. Whether that is because he was milking it before and now he's not, or whether that is because he feels better, and you can draw your own conclusions, but just sort of pay attention to the things as they unfold. Now he's telling him the doctors want to stop it. He has not called it off, which is kind of weird. You'll find out in a moment, but they're now conferring. And Chris Weidman, you can see, looks visibly worried. Now the doctors are trying to explain to him why they want to stop it. He is trying to give Chris every chance. He's saying, are you sure you want to stop it? At this point, Dan has asked Chris, do you want to continue? Chris tells him he wants to continue. Dan says to the doctors, he says he wants to continue. Keep that in mind. Now he's upset. And you can see this is the point the doctors have told him the fight's off. No, like, we understand you want to continue, but we have a medical responsibility here. All right? This is Dan asking the timekeeper for the time to see how much of the 5 minutes has expired. Now, this is Dan talking to a woman who goes by the name of Kim Sumbler. You might be asking, Luke, who is Kim Sumbler? She is the MMA project coordinator for the New York State of You might be asking, Luke, who is Kim Sumbler? She has the title of MMA Project Coordinator in the state of New York. She appears to be some kind of manager of the operations there, not from a seniority standpoint, but from a direct task standpoint. What is her background? According to the bio on the website, which will be linked in the description box below, much of her work comes from Indian reservations or Native American reservations. She has both worked on them and worked as part of the Association of Boxing Commission, as part of the Tribal Affairs Committee, to try and make sure that where fights are regulated on Native American territory, they are done so at a standard that at least is approximating or equal to the Association of Boxing Commission standard. She has been doing that since about 2008. You can read more in her bio there. From what I understand, she does not have a ton of experience in regulating MMA at an elite professional level. I'm not here to declare that regulating only on Native American territory is somehow disqualifying, but to me, I don't know that it necessarily confers a ton of expertise on you as well. Different debate for a different time, but it is at this point Dan is talking to her, and I can't quite tell. I went back and I tried to hear different audio versions on Fight Pass. I could not quite exactly tell what he was saying to her, But he does say the doctors want to stop it. And what I think he was doing, although again, very clearly, I don't know for sure, what I think he was doing was trying to get clarification of the rules from a commission rep in that state. In other words, I believe it's the case that in some states the doctor can advise the referee to stop it, and in other states the doctor can outright stop it. I think he was looking for clarification about what's supposed to happen here. New York is a state where the doctor can stop the fight, and the referee can't do anything about it. Just keep that in mind. So then they come back, and he waves it off. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that portion. These are the slides that go through and explain, well, not explain, but show what happened. Now let's figure out what the hell went wrong. Okay, just what the hell happened there? Oh, man. All right, I made a list of a few things that I think we need to have an examination about, talk further about, or at least note is a major problem. But before I get to that, I want to say something on the good side. There was at least 2 people in this entire exchange, maybe more, but certainly 2, who I can say definitively, or at least within strong reason, did nothing wrong. You might be asking who that is. The answer is the ringside physicians. I know that you may think they are incidental characters in this story, but I don't believe that's true. They are central characters to the story. And if you're asking at every stage who did their job, who didn't F this up, it was the ringside physicians. I went back over the weekend and I looked at New York's regulatory code. And I tried to figure out what responsibilities do they have, what latitude do they have to do their job, and given that, how well of a job did they do? Now, again, I'm not a medical professional, and I'm sure most of you watching are probably not. I don't know what Chris Weidman said to him. I don't know what he saw. I don't know why he made that medical judgment. But I do know that, number one, that first doctor who went in took the time to evaluate him and didn't rush it either. Didn't look and say, no. You've seen that sometimes in boxing. Sometimes if it's a bad enough cut, you don't need a lot of deliberation, but you get the idea. He deliberated over it. He did a number of tests, medical, checking the eyes of Chris Weidman, doing these sort of field sobriety or coherence tests, bringing in a second doctor to get an opinion here. Those things mattered in the end. It turns out in the state of New York, the doctor can enter the cage at any point. Now, I don't know if that exactly means during the middle of a contest, but the way the regulations are written, and I'll link those in the description box as well, they can enter the contest, as it turns out in the written language, at any point required for them to do their medical job. They typically wait until they're asked to come in, but you get the idea. They have free reign there. And in New York State, they are allowed to stop the contest for medical reasons if they deem it so. These doctors, whatever else you want to say about what Weidman was or wasn't doing, or Dan Miragliotta was or wasn't doing, or should have happened or didn't happen, the one constant for me throughout this is those 2 doctors did the job that they were supposed and asked to do. I think that's important. I think we should note it, and we should be grateful that they were there. Okay. Now, that's the good stuff. A lot of it is bad, and this is where we have some serious questions we need to start asking ourselves. Number one, the biggest one for me. What does it even really mean to say a contest is somehow above board and trustworthy because it's state sanctioned? Clearly, I think we can all agree that having a state apparatus involved in this to ensure health and safety is, number one, not a bad thing, and in general, a outright beneficial thing. In virtually every case, it's an outright beneficial thing. In the early 20th century, when commissions were introduced to keep promoters honest, to make sure guys got paid, to see if fights were relatively competitive, this was a great thing, largely, I think, for combative sports. The combative sports world, if you've never been to a fight or if you've never really lived in this world, it attracts some shady characters. And I'm not saying the UFC is that way. I'm just saying, generally speaking, the fight game from the last 100 years to now, I'm not saying it's an inherently unscrupulous environment, but it needs protections to keep it above board. And state sanctioning is an appropriate thing, and it's a good thing on balance. But what it doesn't tell you is that you can be state sanctioned and have an inordinate amount of problems still left over. Just because a bout is state sanctioned does not mean you are guaranteed to get anything even close to effective or appropriate officiating. Just because you're state sanctioned does not mean you are going to be on the receiving end of the highest degree of medical care. I think in this particular case you were, but you get the idea. We often talk about fights as like, well, look, this is state sanctioned, this is regulated by the government, but that's only a very minimal cover for something, a very, very minimal cover. It doesn't really tell you that this is a bout that is being regulated with quality. It merely tells you that there are basic safeguards in place so that this car doesn't drive off a cliff. That's more or less what it confers. I think the second thing we have to say here, and we really have to admit, we all really cheerleaded MMA under the Zuffa era. I mean, there is this thing called the Zuffa myth, which I won't even get into, but certainly you can say people like Mark Ratner and the UFC were heavily involved in lobbying state governments, running towards regulation to get regulated. This has resulted in a major, major problem on the back end. Now that guys are getting better and we are trying to get more specific and helpful in the way in which we regulate, we are running up against a serious problem. Number one, the rules are old and out of touch. Number two, for the jurisdictions that want to update it, they do so in a non-uniform way. And three, we have no real way to coerce them or force them to change that. Boy, that is a serious problem. That is a really serious problem. The good news about state sanctioning is it provides you both legal and ethical cover. And it does guarantee, I guess, again, a basic level of quality. But the problem is that it has deeply, deeply impacted the ability of the various stakeholders involved to iterate the product in a direction that modernizes it for helpful purposes. We have a problem on our hands, folks. This is not a small issue. This is a major issue. You're looking at it right now. This is a living, breathing example of what happens when you trust a state organization, a bureaucratic enterprise, to hold your rule set sacred. When you need to iterate them, it is slow, it is difficult, it is non-uniform, and you have no real mechanism to force them to do this. This is a problem, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, with this new set of rules by the Association of Boxing Commission, where fingers extended, 2 hands down, you guys know the drill. There are other ones involved as well. States picking up some parts of it and not others. Some states not picking it up at all. What a burden this is for athletes. What a burden this is for referees. What a burden this is for everyone involved. And I don't know what the answer is, but you can look at other organizations like the NFL. There are lots of problems with the NFL, but they have the freedom in between seasons, and really whenever they want, to change rules to impact and modernize the game in conformity with results they see on the field. We have a serious, serious problem. In addition, I have to say that the 2-hand down rule is a terrible rule that should never have been made. What was the problem? The problem was you have the exact same position. We saw it before. Mousasi on top of Weidman, and in a different scenario, it was a guy playing tag with the floor to avoid being kicked. Well, now he can do it with 2 hands. This is a terribly imprecise and awful way of iterating a rule. The rule should be whatever we make a fighter being down is, it needs to be so down that there's no question about it insofar as replay or judging what had happened is concerned, or more than that, that you can't, it's harder to play with. There's going to be no scenario unless it's just laying flat on your back. That's the only time a fighter can be down. Well, if that's the extraordinary case, then this is a fairly easy thing to determine. My point being is, look, I think it should be either your knee is down or it's not, right? And you can make it different. You can make it sitting on your rear end or something. But for me, if a knee is down, you're down. Certainly, you can all envision a scenario where it's going to be easy for a fighter to maybe be halfway up, on his knees, and it lands, and a referee can't tell, and maybe they're in a state where they also don't have replay, and you can see what a mess it would be. But I feel like, generally speaking, it's a lot easier to lift someone off of their base from their waist, from underneath their shoulders, like Mousasi did, than it is to lift someone off of their knee, or both knees, or whatever the case may be. All I'm pointing out is, going from saying, well, 1 hand down is no longer down, now you need 2. This is in no way an improvement on the rule. This is not a clarification in any helpful sense. And this fight was a stunning indictment of that fact. This is not something I realized ahead of time. I'm not telling you all the regulators are all idiots. Far from it. These are helpful people trying to solve the problem. But it has become quite apparent to me that just doing this, and we used to do just this, this is not a help. This doesn't help us at all. In addition, I want to make a defense of Dan Miragliotta for just a second. Some folks were saying, why did he stop the fight? What was happening here? Look, you need instant replay for situations like this. He had this sort of back of the line shot versus to the side, and that was a bit of a problem. But the bigger issue to me is you can make a case that, well, maybe Big Dan shouldn't have stopped the fight at that moment and called in the doctors or whatever the case may be. For me, though, the issue is I don't think you can say that. I think what you can say is anyone would have gotten, even if he should have had a better angle, and even if he shouldn't have, there are going to be situations where you naturally assume a referee is not going to be in that position. We need to give them some measure of forgiveness and latitude to correct that after the fact. That's why you need instant replay. That's why you need technological aids of a variety of sort to do that kind of thing. So to me, did he get it right in stopping the fight to begin with? This is obviously a huge problem. But I believe that I didn't notice in real time how difficult it was. Frankly, I don't know how you really definitively make that call until you have instant replay. So really being mad at Dan, if you want to be mad at Dan for some other things that he did, I can understand that. But for his initial decision to call the bout to a halt, I have no issue there. However, where I would have issue is in a lot of other things that he did. Number one, how can New York State not have instant replay? This seems to me, if not merely wrong or impractical, this is just negligent. If you are willing to host title fights from the Ultimate Fighting Championship, your commission better have instant replay. It is outrageous that they didn't. And the UFC has both the technological know-how and the financial resources to make that a no-brainer, not merely for the judges, but for any of the officiating crew who needs it. And that they don't have a rule allowing for that is unforgivable. If you want to host fights on Native American reservations, or you want to have World Series of Fighting, even then you really should, but I can understand certain technological, infrastructural, and financial limitations might not make that possible. You don't have any of those with the UFC. You have no excuse not to do that. And to not be able to carve out a rule for them or issue some kind of way to allow for these guys to have every bit of help that they deserve is just so negligent. Now, that being said, a lot of people have said Chris Weidman has been negligent here, or Chris Weidman has been, karma got him, is what they say. Maybe he was milking it. If he was milking it, oh, guys, I'm so hurt, and ultimately the doctor stops it, he has no one to blame but himself. I want to get to that in just a second. Well, you know what? Maybe I can't. But let me just say this. We'll go back to Big Dan because this is all connected. I don't care what a fighter does short of breaking a rule. And certainly malingering is, you're not supposed to do, but it's not clear that he did that, number one. Everyone's like, he was milking it. Certainly his posture changed. Certainly a lot of things changed over the course of those seconds and minutes. But it's not clear if it's because he slowly got better. It's not clear if he was milking it. He could have been. I absolutely cannot rule that out. In some ways, I feel like it might even be likely, but no one really knows for sure. The medical professionals felt like they saw enough to call it, whether it was some sort of physical cue that he gave or whatever, And yes, at the end there, he was standing up and he was gesturing in a very pronounced way. He had an incentive to do that even if he felt bad. So I don't know what the answer there is. But even if he was milking it a little bit, a fighter is entitled to due process. They are entitled to have the regulations be held up. And I know we're living in the shadow of Towelgate, where the commission was like, we didn't see it. Okay, I understand. But at least insofar as a fight result is concerned, he does have the ability to appeal. I think he will. And I don't see any case how he loses this one. He is entitled for the rules in New York, even if they are backwards, to be the ones that guide the action and hold the officials to account. There is no instant replay in New York. Big Dan talking to Big John and getting someone who had seen instant replay tell him that. I don't know if that's legal or not. Maybe that's a gray area. But even if he told him that, Dan, is not really allowed for that to bring bearing to his judgment. When Chris Weidman says there's no instant replay, no one who makes a decision should be benefiting from that, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. If the rules have any value, it is the value to the extent that they are upheld. And I understand, what the hell was Towelgate? It was a mess. But we should not allow for further messes by acknowledging one was already made. We should hold to the extent that we can and put pressure on the commission to say all that information that Dan got from Big John, whether that was appropriate or not, and I don't know the answer to that because there's so many gray areas in commission behavior. But certainly that information is irrelevant. For Dan's decision, it is irrelevant. It doesn't exist. So for him to then do that and then reverse his call, this is totally out of bounds. How do you reverse a call in a situation that's non-reversible according to the rules? That's what I don't get. There are certain situations in the course of a bout that are reviewable. In this state, at that moment, this is not one of them. And you might say, well, that would unfairly impact Mousasi. Right, it would. And that's not okay either. This is the morass we find ourselves in because of how backwards New York State is when it comes to many issues, not least of which is the very easy implementation of technological aids in serious bouts of consequence. This is the problem. Everybody loses. But people shouldn't be losing for the same reason. Chris Weidman has every right to be angry here. And you might say, well, karma got him. Well, great. That's between Chris Weidman and karma. That's not my concern. My concern is, to what extent was commission protocol followed, and to what extent, if it wasn't, can we do anything about it? Everyone's mad about Towelgate. I don't know what we can do about it reasonably. I legitimately don't know. We raised the issue with the commission. They say, me see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So maybe they'll do that here, in which case I don't know what we can do about it either. But at this juncture, as I'm speaking to you today, Chris Weidman's case about whether or not protocol was followed as it's written in the state, as it should have been in that scenario, is 1,000% correct. What should have happened was almost exactly what did happen, to an extent. In other words, the referee thinks he sees an illegal strike. He separates the two fighters. He calls the doctor to evaluate the fighter who got hit when he was down. He tells the other fighter, I'm not going to take a point. He could have if he wanted to, but he didn't. Put him in a neutral corner. Doctors come in, say to him, we can't continue. Fight's over. That's how it should have been. You might be saying, well, look, that's terribly unfair. Right, that's on New York. And the UFC needs to think long and hard about going back there if they're not going to be able to use instant replay. And not just instant replay for fouls, instant replay for all kinds of things. Which brings me to the last point in this. I don't understand today in MMA why we adopt this baseball religiosity about the beauty and integrity of decisions that come from primates. I mean us. Well, if the referee didn't see it, we should let it go. We don't really want to have instant replay. We don't want to mess with the special ingredient that is fighting. This to me is an asinine, ridiculous point. We want to get it right. That's what we want to do. And we need to incorporate technological aids to the extent they are helpful in those kinds of situations. And I don't know what you want to call what happened on Saturday, where referees are conferring and some are looking at the monitor and Big Dan's bringing that information into the cage. I don't know what you want to do about it. I don't know what we can do about it. But here's about the past anyway. But going forward, anybody who tells you, we really don't want to bring in that instant replay, it just takes away something from the game or the sport. These are people who are Luddites, who are not to be listened to at all. at all. You are ruining fighters' careers. You are damaging their ability to get money. You are damaging their moment in time. You are taking things from them you have no right to take when you know, in the case of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, there are bigger things, there are hurdles they can clear here in terms of infrastructure, price, and whatever the case may be. It is irresponsible from any MMA stakeholder to say we don't need more technological aids. Yes, we do. The timekeeper needs it. The referee needs it. The judges need it. And that's not going to solve every problem, but it's going to make a big difference. No more. No more of this Luddite, anti-technological attitude where it interrupts really something genuine, something organic about the moment. Good. I'm glad. It should. Because your organic moment is a nightmare for everybody. You are letting people who make errors, understandable errors, not correct their mistakes. Terrible, terrible. In a perfect world, what should it have been? What it should have been was, Big Dan makes a mistake, doesn't realize it's legal, but that's okay, stops it, looks at instant replay, sees that it's legal, and then has protocol in place. The protocol in place can be one of two things. First, before that fight can be restarted, the doctors have to clear it. Doctors have to say, okay. And then if the doctors say it's okay to re-clear it because the shots were legal and he's not adversely affected to the point where he can't continue, you put them back where they were. And that's the end of it. And that's the end of it. And then they go back. And that would have been fine. But no one knew what the protocol was because of all the problems I've mentioned before between the non-uniformity and everything else, and there's the lack of technological aid, and then people trying to make the fight different, and it wound up being a disaster. But that's what should have happened. Okay, referee has instant replay. He checks. Nope, that's legal. Doc, can he go? Can he go? Can he go? No, he can't. Fight stop. Doc, can he go? Can he go? Yes, he can. Get back here. Go. The referee is the bus driver for the whole thing, and he's the one who's supposed to be dictating to the orchestra what notes you play at what time. That's how that should have gone, and it didn't. And I think it will be overturned, and it's a travesty for Chris Weidman, who now has 3 losses in a row. It's a travesty for officiating generally. It's a total embarrassment for the New York State Athletic Commission. It's a wake-up call for all of us that we have a serious problem on our hands between attitudes about technological improvements and that we have enshrined via law, literally via law, we have enshrined government bureaucratic agents to update rules, which they can neither do effectively, uniformly, or on time. We got a serious, serious problem on our hands. And after all that terrible news, let's think about some good news, that being the fights coming up in the week ahead. 2 major events of consequence this coming week. The biggest of the 2 is going to be on Saturday, April 15th. This will take place at the Sprint Center in Kansas City, Missouri. It is, of course, UFC on Fox, Demetrius Johnson versus Wilson Hayes, or UFC on Fox 24. 4 fights on the main card. Johnson versus Hayes, Rose Namajunas versus Michelle Waterson, Ronaldo Jacare Souza versus Robert Whittaker. Sick fight right there. And then the card opens with Jeremy Stevens versus Renato Moicano. Another interesting fight. On the prelim card, this will also be on Big Fox. Alexander Volkov versus Roy Nelson. Patrick Williams versus Tom Duquesnoy. Great fight that one is. Bobby Green versus Rashid Magomedov. Tim Elliott versus Louis Smolka. And then on the Fight Pass portion, there's going to be 5 fights on that one. Devin Clark versus Jake Collier. Anthony Smith versus Andrew Sanchez. Aljamain Sterling versus Augusto Mendez. Zach Cummings, Nathan Coy. Ashley Evans Smith versus Ketlin Vieira. Then there's also, don't forget, on that Friday for Bellator, it's Bellator 177 plus Bellator Kickboxing 6. For the MMA portion, you've got Eduardo Dantas versus Leandro Higo. Great fight that one is. Really good. If you guys don't know who Leandro Higo is, he's a top prospect. Immediate title shot against Eduardo Dantas. That's one to watch. Daniel Weichel versus John Teixeira. Adam Borix versus Anthony Taylor. And then Lena Ovchidnikova versus Helen Harper. On the Bellator kickboxing portion, Kareem Gaji's on the card. Gabriel Varga, Joe Schilling, Yorina Bars, the lady who roughed up Cyborg, she's going to be on that card. And then Raymond Daniels, the exciting striker, the two-touch spinning back kick he landed on Francois Ambang many, many glories ago. So that's what's coming up in the week ahead. If you have any questions, concerns, or emails, you know the place to send them, luke.thomas@sbnation.com. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel below. Give the video a like. And until next time, enjoy the fights.